there's this balancing act of like solving the problem that's right in front of you and looking ahead a little bit, but not too far, right? Because you don't want to overdo it. But you do have to have some future thought for sure and try to be as preemptive as you can.
Welcome to the Agile Digital Transformation Podcast, where we explore different aspects of digital transformation and digital experience with your host, Tim Butera, Content and Community Manager at AgileDrop.
Hello, everyone. Thanks for tuning in. I'm joined today by Jason Monberg, CEO of respected digital product development firm and consultancy Presence, with over 25 years of industry experience. In today's episode, we'll be talking about adapting to the constant technology shifts in order to endure your business's market value. Jason, welcome to our podcast. We're very, very happy to have you here today. Anything you want to add to the introduction?
Thank you. Well, I'm thrilled to be here, and I'll just add that I've been doing this work for 25 years, helping companies develop digital products, and worked across the spectrum from like two-person startups to some of the largest companies in the world. And I'm just thrilled to share my experience. So hoping it can be helpful to folks out there.
Well, so let's just go ahead and start with that. So can you share, in the context of the conversation that we're having today, can you share the most important lessons that you've learned from the 25 years that you've been doing this?
Yeah, absolutely. And that's, in some respects, that's such a hard question because I'm still learning. There's so much to learn. And I feel like, one of the most important things is just you have to constantly pay attention. But when I think about like companies actually managing technology and developing products and thinking about where they're going, a few things really rise to the top. And one of the most important things I think is patience. And it's a little bit counterintuitive, especially coming from Silicon Valley, where I think everything is go, go, go. You need to be first. But the reality is that really large technology shifts take years, if not decades. And I'm thinking about, when the internet arrived. It didn't just arrive one day and suddenly we had Amazon. It took years and years. And it's not always the first company to get their product out that's going to quote win. And these products utilizing technology evolve over time, right? So we have different generations of, if you just look at like CRM systems, we've had generations of CRM systems that come through. And so I think this notion of patience and being thoughtful is really powerful. And related to that with technology is also this notion of understanding why you're doing something. So I see a lot of people making what I would consider sort of knee-jerk reactions. And it's the type of thing where I think if you can step back, and this doesn't have to take a long period of time. This is just stepping back, making sure you're getting the information from your internal sources, your external customers, and really thinking through why you're going to incorporate some new technology or follow some shift that you perceive. And we have some really fantastic examples. Like if we look at AR and VR, really popular several years ago, and you saw lots of companies like piling in trying to do something, but it wasn't a shift that was at the magnitude that every end user was going to suddenly start using it. They're not going to wake up tomorrow and spend $1,000 on a headset. And I think it's just a good example where it's still playing out, right? And I think there are some fantastic uses, but is it the type of thing that, Target, which is a leading physical retailer out in the United States, do they need to suddenly have a VR strategy? Maybe, but probably not, or they probably have some time to think about it. And so I think we see a lot of people jumping in without really thinking about why they're going to do it. What kind of value are they going to give to their customers? What does it mean for their business? And so I think there's a lot of efficiency that one can find there. And then there's two other things that are more about how we do our day-to-day job. And so the other one is communications. I think that a lot of times when we're working in an environment with rapid change, the way that you communicate can really impact whether you're successful or not. And this comes straight into things like agile development and what type of processes you use. But we're like huge fans of writing things down as 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 it might seem a little pedantic, when we're like rapid fire making decisions in Slack and things like that. But ultimately, we want to have sort of a document somewhere that's telling us why we did what we did, and we're communicating what we want to actually accomplish. And when we do that and this is really at the sort of micro level, even thinking about change in terms of the library that you might be using in a product, it's incredibly valuable to be able to go back and see this history. So we're always looking for that when we talk about big changes, like, hey, should we incorporate Gen AI into our product? Or even the small changes, like we're going to swap out a library, because all of these things have massive ripple effects. And then the very last thing, which is it's a little bit orthogonal, and this is more of just a really general purpose learning from all the years, is I think that the relationships that we develop in our work are absolutely profound, and they really impact where you go. And I think when I was like a 20-year-old developer turning into a product manager, trying to be an executive, I had zero idea that the relationships I was developing then with people were actually going to impact where I went and what I did 20 years later. And I still get phone calls from people saying, "Hey, Jason, I remember a conversation we had, 15 years ago, and I'm working on a project that's related to that. Can we talk?"
Mhm.
Right? And just being able to nurture those relationships, I think, is really powerful. And when we talk about change, that's where I get a lot of my information. Certainly, I read the news, I read blogs, but I really like talking to people who are having experiences with this technology to find out what they're up to. I actually recently had someone that I worked for at one of the startups. He started a company, he recruited me in. He's gone on to do all kinds of interesting things, investing, executive roles, and he was coming back around to AI. And he just gave me a call and said, "Hey, I know you guys are working on some AI stuff, and I've got a bunch of questions because I've got this big project I want to do." And we just chatted. I introduced him to some other folks that I've been talking to. And just through that process, it was keeping me up to date on where the trends were going with technology. So I think that that is immensely powerful and really important for folks.
Yeah, but that was a great start. Some really great points here. But basically, all of the points that you highlighted are really important in business, but they're also just, if you adopt everything that you just said in your personal life, then, you'll be that much better for it in your personal life as well. So it's patience, knowing the why, having good communication, and having good relationships that you nurture, and that that as you just exemplified, can bring you a lot of value down the line if you do nurture them properly.
Absolutely. Yeah.
So when it comes to, enduring market value, or like, I guess when it comes to scalability, right? What have you found to be kind of the most important factor or factors in order to scale, not just succeed, in a one-shot manner?
Yeah. Yeah. Well, and so I had a question for you. Like, when you think about scalability, are you thinking about technology or teams or
Mhm.
the product from a feature set standpoint, or maybe all of the above?
Yeah, I mean, I'm guessing that if you wanted to scale the product properly so that it would continue satisfying and meeting its users' needs, that would just automatically necessitate expanding your team as well. So I'm kind of meaning all of the above.
Okay. Yeah. So I'll just tackle it sort of like
Mhm.
one layer at a time. So when I think about scaling from a technical standpoint, I think one of the aspects of this that a lot of people might not have experience with is that when you're really doing large scale scaling or hyperscaling, you're actually rewriting your product. So, the initial version of a product typically doesn't last that long if you're going to go through a massive scaling cycle.
Mhm.
And we've seen name brand products that are pretty well advertised. I think Facebook is probably one of the best examples. But, you can find people talking about, the 5 or 6 different major kind of like rewrites as they went through like different levels of scaling. And so I think the cautionary side is don't try to preemptively scale for every situation, right? You don't want to over optimize early on. What you really want to do is get a product that's successful so that you have that scalability problem. Now,
Mm,
there's lots of things you can do to to prepare yourself, and maybe that's the the message is like, be prepared but don't over optimize. And so when I think about preparing, I think a lot more about the infrastructure and the data structures. These are like really the fundamental components of your product that will let you have flexibility. If you want to have, say, a publicly accessible API later on, you really have to have like intelligent data structures. But I also think you have to be very open about the fact that you're probably going to rewrite this at some point in time if you're really finding success. And there are also lots of products that maybe don't need to scale because they sort of they hit their natural point. And what you're really interested in is scaling the features or making sure that it's easy to maintain. And so when I think about it at that level, I think about really clear code. I personally don't like products that are written in obfuscated code. I like stuff unpacked. I'd rather see really verbose code that any engineer could look at and go, oh, I can figure out how to fix this, as opposed to like some really dense functional programming that's, it's doing a lot of stuff in 3 lines of code,
mhm,
but you really need to be an expert in that code and product to unpack it. So I think about that sort of like scalability from a maintaining standpoint. From a feature standpoint, I really like to look at the UX that's generated. And like we often have conversations about like what kind of space does our UX have? So obviously, like when you first create a product, you're not going to have every feature in it. But if you can look forward and you can say, well, we probably think we want to have this analytics portion of it, but that's probably a year out. And you just look at the user experience. Like, do you physically have space on the screen for additional features? Or have you done something that's like really putting yourself in a corner and it's like, this is all you have? So think about it from that standpoint. And then of course, like your team and your organization. I was actually reading last night about Linear and how they organize their teams. And I loved they're about 50 people, but they are going through lots of growth right now. And what they were talking about was how they like to have really small teams, 2 engineers and a designer work on a feature on one part of the product. But then when they're done with that part of it, move on to another part of the product. And their goal very clearly is to have lots of people that understand the entire product. And I love that as a philosophy, particularly at the stage that they're at. I think at a certain point that's, you're not going to have any runway with that. But I do think about like when you're putting your teams together, what's your unit of measure, right? Like, is it a 5-person team? Is it a 3-person team? Is it a 10-person team? And I think particularly in the early stages, working with that unit. And so how many, if I get a 5-person team that's working very well, can I replicate that with 2 more 5-person teams? And then can I get that to like 5-person teams? And and as you're scaling, and this is similar with the product where you might be at a point where you need to rewrite it, I think you have to be open with your teams to say, hey, now we have 5-person teams. Are we at a point where we have to rethink how we're organizing ourselves and managing ourselves? Or maybe we can continue in this pattern. And I think that that's probably one of the fundamental things about scaling in general is that you're going through these phase shifts as you scale. And what you want to understand is whether you're at a plateau and you're staying at that plateau, or if you're going through a phase shift. And when you go through a phase shift, you have to rethink how things are organized. And so this is really to say you really need to understand where you're at in the cycle, and then you have to apply your kind of what you want out of it. What are your goals around this? Why are you going to change things up? Maybe you need more efficiency, maybe your quality is suffering a little bit, but you have to look at things like that in terms of your team. And then there's a whole lot about business scaling, but that's not
mhm.
not as much my purview.
This basically all still tied back to the 4 points that we highlighted in the first question, right? So patience, knowing the why, good communication and relationships, and also, I mean, I guess preemptiveness is also a very important part of it, right? If you want, like in terms, especially in terms of something like feature scaling, when you roll out features, it later on, as you said, and you might realize that you didn't leave enough screen space for the new feature to be able to be incorporated in a user-friendly manner that doesn't break stuff. So yeah.
Yeah, absolutely. Right. And there's this notion of, I think there's this balancing act of like solving the problem that's right in front of you and looking ahead a little bit, but not too far, right? Because you don't want to overdo it, but you do have to have some future thought for sure, and try to be as preemptive as you can
Yeah,
within reason.
I mean, if we're talking about enduring constant technology shifts, a bigger feature or a bigger, more important product might take it a really long time to develop, which might mean that, from the time you start working on it, from the time that you realize, oh, that this is like a potential market niche, it's something that the market could benefit from, it's something that we could benefit from if we roll it out quickly enough. But then by the time that you actually develop it, needs and the market will have changed, not just might have changed, right? So you can't really get anywhere if you only develop for the current need, because the current need might not be a need still once you actually finish developing for it, right? So you need to be future ready.
Yeah, absolutely. And that comes back to that notion, like if we really look at like incorporating new technology into what we're doing, these ideas of doing experiments or doing small releases first, I think are really powerful. One of the things I was just thinking about recently was when I started out in the 90s, I was really influenced by extreme programming. Like that was the first kind of like literature I read about this, what we consider sort of agile ways of development. And they were promoting these fast release cycles, but a lot of the software that they were writing then was released on the scale of years. So they would spend like a couple years doing something, and so or a few years. And so a fast release cycle for them might be 6 months getting a feature out and testing it, and then another 6 months. For us, we regularly release the first version of a product, of the entire product, in 4 to 6 months. And so we have this like really great situation where we can, and many organizations, I think, can experiment with new technologies in a matter of weeks or a small number of months. And I do think that that's a really, really important factor. If you get to the point where you're saying we really need to try this, we need to invest some time in it, that ability to push out those features to whether it's a small group or your entire audience, that is, I mean, it's really profound in terms of the ability to distribute and get feedback. And I think if you're right, if you're deeply involved in your product and navigating technology change, I think that's a must for you to be able to do this sort of rapid iteration prototyping experiments.
Yeah, so you just said that you started in the 90s. We said at the beginning that you have over 25 years of experience, but I'm not sure how well the 20 years of experience then was able to prepare you for what came when COVID happened. So what were some of the most important shifts, some of the most important changes that you've noticed in your career post-COVID that came with COVID?
Yeah, I think in 10 years, we're going to have an amazing amount of experience written down, and we're going to talk about these changes. Again, I think it's one of the things we're still learning about, but right, I think nothing really prepared us. I do think that it was, well, certainly coming from the San Francisco Bay Area, we were already doing a bit of distributed work. I think that working, like we often work with teams that are in other countries. And I think that ability and certainly the type of work we do where we're on a screen all day is easier if you're remote. And so I do think that the natural state of our business made it easy to transition to at home. But the changes they're so much more fundamental. And so the biggest thing, okay, so COVID happens, and we're like, maybe we consult with companies, we do a lot of in-person work, we find in-person work to be incredibly powerful, we can move so fast with people. So that all goes away for a couple of years, and we were concerned about our business. We just didn't know if it would exist. So the first thing was, can we do business not just the work that we do, but also the sales cycle. Can we generate trust with people over a video communication link? And pretty quickly, I think I'd say about 3 months into it, we saw that we could conduct all of our business online. And initially, that was a fantastic thing. I think we changed our processes a little. There was more written work that was required. I think communication became a little bit more challenging, and so we had to adjust. That has not been easy or evenly distributed for everyone, but everyone, I think, sort of like slogged through that. The really interesting part has been coming back to the office. So now we can be in person, and I think we're in this state where we're probably never going to go back to how it was, where everyone comes into the office every day, but we're in this really deep hybrid sort of state. And so as a business owner and someone who's working on these projects where we feel like being in person can be really powerful and is really important, I think that we've had to pick and choose when we ask people to come in to the office. And this also means a lot of people moved. So this also means a lot of people are getting on planes and staying in hotels in order to make this happen. So there's a lot of emphasis on really taking advantage of that in-person time.
Mm-hmm.
The other side of it is when we're remote is how do we maintain a culture that's sort of like self-reinforcing where people are feeling connected. That's been that's been a real struggle. But we do things, we'll do online events, we'll do additional if we do have people coming in, we're going to try to do some other activities like a social activity. And so these are all the things we're working on. Interestingly, I don't think that it's really impacted the quality of the work per se.
Mm-hmm.
So we've still been able to design and develop. The quality still feels very high. I think we're just losing out on some of the speed and interesting communication we can have when we're in person. And I do think we're going to keep getting better at that. We need better tools. I'm certainly concerned about like the intersection of post COVID and AI and like what does that mean for work? So there's some really big questions there. But that's how I've seen it. We also have done a fair amount of work with physical hardware products.
Mm-hmm.
And so with those teams, I think there's more of a consensus that you need to actually be with the physical product. And so if we can't ship out a version of a product, if it's a big expensive machine that we're working on, the teams are comfortable coming together. So we see pockets of work that actually operate as they did pre-COVID. But certainly with where, most of what we do is pure software and people can do software from anywhere and they are. And I think as a community, we just have to accept that. That's how it's going to be and find other solutions for keeping our teams together.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, I mean, that was definitely one of the biggest changes that we've all experienced, right, on a personal level. And probably, I mean, like you as a CEO, you experienced it both on the level of the CEO, somebody who's leading the company, and on a personal level. So I'm guessing that, that this is something we probably talked a lot more about hybrid work and remote work, in the first few years after COVID. Now the conversations have kind of died down, but I still think that it's relevant to discuss here, in the context of these adaptations and these shifts, which are, technology, COVID fueled a massive technology shift. It wasn't in itself a technology shift, but it was related to a lot of technology shifts, right? So it doesn't necessarily need to mean like the release of GPT 3.5 or something like that. It can also be another driver that kind of drives these shifts, right?
Yeah. Yeah. And you see a lot of like people who are developing products are taking into account the fact that their customers are going to be distributed. So you're
Mm-hmm.
starting to see that actually impact some of the feature sets as well, which is really interesting, right? Like we've all taken this turn in terms of what the products need to support, particularly in these desk job high tech environments.
Mm-hmm. This is like in terms of like some kind of B2B selling, B2B hardware, stuff like that.
Yeah,
Mm-hmm.
yeah, absolutely.
Cool. A very, very great and very interesting conversation, Jason. Just before we wrap it up, I just like for you to maybe based on everything that we've discussed today, to kind of sum everything up, what will be your top tips to listeners for being able to better adapt to all of these shifts that we discussed?
Yeah, I mean, for sure, coming back to the sort of introductory points of really having patience and understanding why you're going to follow some kind of technology change, or why are you incorporating a new technology into your product? What is the value there? I think it's so fundamental for a business, and it can be very easy to overlook. And then, making sure that you have great communication and you're paying attention to the relationships, because these are the things that are going to support you in the future more than anything else.
Awesome. And if people wanted to learn even more or connect with you or learn more about Presence, where can they do that?
Oh yeah, absolutely. So I'm on LinkedIn. It's just LinkedIn/Jason Monberg. And then you can email me, jason@presencepg.com. And we have, go to our website. We have all kinds of blog posts, but I'm happy to talk with people directly as well.
Awesome. Awesome. We'll make sure to include that in the show notes. And Jason, thanks again for coming to the show today, for sharing your insights, your lessons with us. Again, it was great having you here.
Yeah, absolutely. My pleasure. Thank you.
And well, to our listeners, that's all for this episode. Have a great day, everyone, and stay safe.
Thanks for tuning in. If you'd like to check out our other episodes, you can find all of them at agiledrop.com/podcast, as well as on all the most popular podcasting platforms. Make sure to subscribe so you don't miss any new episodes, and don't forget to share the podcast with your friends and colleagues.